leadership is the ability to create change. Wherever you are, whatever role you're in right now, there's some opportunity for you to initiate change, to begin to lean into the process of leading something.
Justin.
Sam.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Appreciate your time here.
Yeah.
I have no real perfect place to start this, so I was just thinking we might begin at the beginning. Talking about leadership, and I'm wondering if you can remember the first time you identified it. Who was there? What was going on?
Yeah.
Leaders, leadership.
I was thinking about this in preparation for our time together today, and I'm sure that I've experienced leadership and seen leaders in my own family growing up. Somebody would lead a moment or lead us to do something, or playing sports and coaches talking about leadership, or teachers talking about leadership, or it was clearly something I knew about. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but I don't think I actually ever recognized leadership for what it was till probably just about 10 years ago. And it was the moment where I think I'd had lots of responsibilities in my life up to that point, different things I had to do, tasks, classes, even jobs. But it was the first time I found myself in a job where some change needed to happen, and it was on my shoulders to negotiate that change. And so I was working at a church as a youth director, and this was a church that had about 5,000 members, but they only had about 30 kids come into their youth group. And so they had hired me and just said, we need you to kind of change this, like fix our youth program. And I remember coming in, and for the first time, it wasn't just somebody telling me exactly what to do and then me doing it, but here's a problem, create a solution, how are you going to go about doing that? And I just remember this overwhelming sense of like, how in the world do I do this? One of the things I realized right away is that a number of the volunteers who'd been a part of this organization, many of them for 20, 30 years, we were going to probably need to say goodbye to them. We were going to have to give them a nice dismissal and recruit new talent and get some vision and find staff and the rest. And all of a sudden I realized all the buy-in I would need, all the people who would have to follow along. And that was the first time that I woke up to, oh my gosh, leadership's a real thing. I don't know how to do it. How does anybody in this world get anything done and get buy-in and especially negotiate conflict and change and the rest? And so it was probably the first time I really remember this sense of honestly respecting leadership as something that I think up to that point in my life, if somebody were asking me about leadership, I would have kind of made some snarky joke that it's about eye contact and good firm handshakes. And that lots of people fill lots of books with stuff that everybody knows and get rich off of it. And that day I woke up to, oh no, this is really hard and I have no idea how to do this. And began buying all those books and watching everybody in my life who seemed to be leading anything or negotiating any sort of change. And so I wish that I had been paying attention to leadership for a lot longer in my life, but I think I was just numb to it. I think I was blind to leadership that was happening around me until I myself was in a space where I had to do it and realized I was unprepared, didn't know how. So I think that's the first moment I really feel it. Not that there weren't leaders around me or that I can now look back on, but I didn't know it in the moment. Yeah,
it's interesting. So you were like the first real conscious memory you've got of leadership is when you were kind of thrown in that pool.
Yeah.
And kind of looked around and felt like a lot of people feel, I think, just like completely unprepared. I'm assuming that went well, or I doubt I'd be talking to you here today. I mean, just continue just with that journey. I mean, it sounded like some really difficult decisions that you needed to make and implement. And how'd you go about that, and how did that work? And then also just, I'm assuming, sort of there was a new momentum that was established. Or work us through that early journey.
Yeah. One of the reasons that maybe I also didn't recognize leadership so much around me is that, at the time I think I was still in my early 20s, and it's that moment where you're still pretty self-obsessed, and you don't even know it. And so I figured that everybody was wired the way that I was wired, and everybody does what I do, and everybody likes what I. And so not only did I not recognize leadership gifts in people around me, but I didn't recognize that some of my own just hardwiring was in a natural direction towards leadership of things like I think have some innate gifts just for communication and I think passion and casting vision, and I can get excited about things that can become contagious to other people around me. And so honestly, at that early entry into leadership, the beginning of that I think did go pretty well and largely rode on just some of my natural abilities and talents around just seeing what needed to happen and doing that, and then bringing other people along, communicating what we were doing. And a lot of that was natural for me. And so it went fairly well, for the first few months. But then eventually something actually does start to grow, and you can't do it all by yourself. And that's where I kind of really hit the okay, this is where my gifts start to run out of gas, and I need some other people. And I had not really worked on that over the course of I was not a group project kind of guy. I had not spent a lot of time really refining interpersonal skills or thinking about how to appropriately bring people along, or how much information is the right amount at a certain time, or too much, or all of those sorts of things. So at the beginning, I think you can get a little bit of a adrenaline shot just with kind of a person who steps up and says, I know where we're headed and let's go there. And then, we start hiring staff and we start building volunteers and we start creating systems, and pretty quickly I ran out of my own runway and needed other people. And that's when I started learning the hard lessons of leadership. That's when things probably got a little bumpy, and in many ways continue to be, as I realize and respect kind of leadership more and more, and the art of it even today. So.
Yeah, it's interesting you say the art, not the science. Yeah. It's maybe some combination of the two, but if you were asked to define it, leadership, so what, given your experiences and all of that, what definition, if you have one?
Yeah, and I think, and it'll show a little bit of my own bias, I think there's a lot of great definitions out there on leadership. I think if I'm being honest, this may not be the best definition of leadership, and it may not be a healthy one for other people to have, but if I were to answer it honestly, I would say that I operate out of a sense that leadership is the ability to create change. Some people would define it as influence, but for me it's just anybody who can make change, who can help people make change, who can help organizations create change, who can change the world. Leadership is just the ability to create change in my mind. That's I'm a pretty task-oriented person, so I think that's largely why I see it that way, but that would probably be my shortest, best definition of how to go about doing that.
In that context, and by the way, good news here, I don't disagree with you.
Okay.
Usually when you talk about leadership, no matter how you define it, it's under this umbrella of change management, and in some case, maybe even stability, kind of creating the long-term aspect of the change and kind of reinforcing that. But why so many problems? Why so many influence-related, leadership-related? I mean, maybe that has something to do with just the pervasiveness of change. I don't know, but why are there so many, in all realms of life, leadership challenges?
Gosh, I don't know. I feel them. I think we're all resistant to change. Even leaders are resistant to change. Even people who moniker as I create change have their own kind of tolerance level. For me, I think a lot of it too is change is about loss of control. I think a lot of change means that it's this dance of pursuing a future that we think we all want, but realizing that we might not be control the outcome or how we get there, or when we get there. So I think we're all creatures who want that stability, and we get attached to it when we find it. And continuing to lead people, and then it's just people. I often say that what I do would be so easy if it weren't for people. And I think that's probably true not only of the church, but also of organizations. And yet people are complex, and few of us are wired kind of exactly the same way, and what motivates one person doesn't motivate the other. And I'll work with one person or one idea long enough to finally figure it out, and then find that it doesn't work at all in this situation or this person. And remaining adaptive is just, I think, so much of the challenge for all of us involved who are trying to do anything worthwhile. So.
Yeah, most people are all for teams as long as they're the team captain.
That's it.
And most people are all for change as long as it's change they believe in and that they're driving. Right. But when it's change that sort of challenges what you think, what you believe, the way you think things should be, it's a whole different thing. But there's some sort of interesting mix here between, leadership is like vision,
right,
and tough decisions and all of that sort of thing. And then the whole servant aspect to it, like being really responsive and adaptive to other people. So what experience have you had or advice would you have associated with implementing a vision that challenges the status quo of people where you're still trying to adapt to kind of meet their needs somehow, some way?
And I would say those have been the two kind of chapters in my journey so far, which I feel like I'm at the very beginning of discovering what leadership's about and finding my own leadership voice. And, I've only been awake to this for, like I said, maybe 8 or 9 years. So I think the first chapter of kind of my leadership journey was tapping into my innate gifts, which were around vision and communication and clarity and focus about who we are and what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish. The second chapter was realizing that wasn't enough. And now I'm leaning into places that I'm not as comfortable in, that I'm not as good at, which are a lot more of the interpersonal, the relational, the servant leadership stuff. And honestly, when I hang out with 20-year-olds and who really want to lead, they like the idea of the title or of them being ideators who are like creating. But I don't think anybody gets real, at least most of the folks, at least who are wired like me that I connect with and often spend time with, very rarely in your 20s do you recognize that so much of leadership is going to be this deal where you're actually committed more to the success of the people who serve you and work for you than you are your own. That it's about pouring your own life out, emptying your own cup into other people, that moving your own agenda forward often gets there quickest by developing other people. And man, that is not what I thought I signed up for. I thought when I started in leadership, I just thought the best ideas win. I got the best ideas, we'll win, and then realized pretty quickly that ideas and charisma honestly have a pretty low ceiling and a short expiration date. When I got hungry for leadership and sat down with lots of great leaders, one of the things I would realize is like some of the greatest leaders who had the most influence in our city, just to be honest, they didn't strike me as having like the sharpest ideas or the brightest minds in the room, but they had created cultures that were developing people and moving folks along and serving their entire organization and saw themselves as kind of a leader in that way. And so that's been the new adjustment I feel like I'm, being forced to make every day to recenter my focus not on even my own agenda or my own success, but the success of those who are serving with me, working for me. And that's hard. And that's where all that relational stuff, and it's just a very different thing than what I originally thought leadership would be about.
What advice would you have to young leaders? Like given your experiences and kind of how you said you identified leadership for the first time, if you were going to say, okay, you aspire to have influence and have meaning in your life, here's what I think you should do. What would you pass on? What would you say to those aspiring leaders?
I think really just two things. The first thing would be just to initiate change. Wherever you are, whatever role you're in right now, whether you're a volunteer in some organization, whether you're a staff member, where you're administrative assistant, wherever you are, there's some opportunity for you to initiate change, to begin to lean into the process of leading something. And I think one of the traps that a lot of, especially some of my generation and millennials will fall into is they wait for somebody to give them the title or to give them influence to sort of bestow them with that. That happens, I suppose, for some rare cases. Most of the leaders I know, though, no one handed them influence, that they created it. That there was a day when they had none and they initiated change and it worked or it didn't work and they learned some things from it and then they improved. And eventually they had created enough influence that somebody gave them a title or whatever, but the influence was already there. The leadership abilities had already been developed. And I think it's a mistake to wait for somebody to invite you to change something and so wherever you are, whatever you see that needs to be, that you think you can improve or make better, lean into the arena, begin, start wherever you're at and see where that goes. So, I mean, I think first just initiate change wherever you're at. And then the second thing is just evaluate that entire process and how that experience went. So much of leadership for me has been about the really painful experience of watching the tape. You know, literally listening to sermons I preached. I remember the first couple of years when I would speak. It was so painful. I mean, it's like that experience when you leave a voicemail and you just can't listen to it because it hurt. I can't possibly sound like that. But doing the hard work of listening. My first youth group that I was leading, I was tasked with communicating every week to a couple hundred students, middle schoolers, who were just miserable human beings. And there was this whole row of boys who would sit in the back. And for 4 years that I led them, every Sunday they would come up at the end of my talk and go, 57, 63. And eventually I was like, what are you guys talking about? And they're like, that's how many times you said today. And I was like, they didn't listen to a word I said. They just sat back there and counted how many times. And I eventually just like, okay, like I'm going to get to 0. Like we're going to figure this out. And I think those experiences of just doing an autopsy, you initiate change, it worked, it didn't work, what didn't work, and inviting feedback. Guys, how am I doing? How did that go? What's it like to be on the other side of me? You know, so much of leadership is self-awareness. And much of us are so blind to the experience of ourselves to others. And so initiate some change and then just evaluate yourself. Do the personality profile work. Take some leadership curriculum, classes, development stuff, like the great stuff you guys do here at Center for Leadership Studies. I mean, I think those are incredible opportunities to learn more about your own leadership style and your strengths and weaknesses. And then regularly invite people in to give you feedback. People will give it to you if you ask for it. And you'll become a better leader because of it, and the organization will become stronger. It isn't without pain, but it's worth it. And so I think if folks initiate change and they evaluate what they do, that's a pretty significant pathway to growth. And along the way, you'll learn to be gentle with yourself, because otherwise you won't survive, and to take kind of your mission seriously, but yourself not so much. And those are the things that I think are really important if you're going to survive as a leader. So I think that's kind of what my advice would be to young folks getting going.
That would be awesome advice.
Yeah.
One other question. You are a husband and a father of 2 beautiful children. How does leadership, what you do at work, what other leaders do at work, how is that similar to or different from your responsibility as a husband and a father and kind of leading in your personal life? What sort of parallels and what sort of differences are there?
I think there's a lot of similarities. I think the challenge is, for a lot of us who are so passionate about our work, is that we can be so focused and purpose-oriented and kind of mission-driven at work. We can be so focused on developing people at work, at achieving some beautiful things together, that when we go home we sort of check out on all of that stuff with our families. And so for me, I think the challenge for me is to bring all of that same passion and energy and focus and mission and vision to developing my kids, for us as a family to have a shared sense of purpose and what we're about and how we live together, to create as much space at home for me to listen to my family as I am trying to create space to listen to my staff and those who volunteer in our organization. And in many ways, I think they're very similar, but unfortunately, I think very few of us make that connection. And some of the most gifted leaders who can build incredible organizations will often neglect their family. One of my mentors has reminded me that often maybe the most significant thing you do in your life won't be kind of an organization you build or a company you create, but a human being that you raise or a person that you love. And so it's kind of a humbling realization that I have pretty regularly, that in the same way that I need to be growing as a leader at work, I need to be growing as a husband and a father regularly at home. And that if those two things aren't happening at the same time, pretty soon, that integrity that I want for my life, it will impact both. That I can't just be an incredible sort of leader and neglect my family, because pretty quickly I won't be that great of a leader. And so they both have to kind of rise together. So that's the next chapter for me as well, is learning how to balance those things to create the space and time and intentionality there as well.
from my perspective, so far so good on that.
We're trying.
Yeah, parenting gets a little different though when your kids hit middle school. So don't be a lot of.
I'll keep low expectations.
So
a lot
of
promises.
I've paid attention to 2 or 3 of your services, but I remember you telling me there's some kind of like almost like a retreat setting that you go to before you're going to be a pastor, and they give you some test. It's like one of these 200 item test things, and then you get some feedback. And for most people, it's kind of a coronation where they go, "Hey, it's good.
Right,
come here." And
right.
with you, when you took your test, it was sort of.
Not so much.
Hey, wait a minute. This your data is suggesting that you should be sort of a guy that takes over a company and fires a bunch of people and it turns profitability. Tell me about that sort of I guess general makeup from a very valid assessment and your ability. I guess at some juncture, leadership is about saying no or about separating yourself from. Okay, here's what represented the past, and here's where we're going. My sense is that's really different, and I would suggest more challenging in a volunteer organization, than it might be in a corporate setting, where you come in and there's all sorts of, kind of.
Oh man, so much so. I mean, when I was in the process of becoming a pastor, one of the checks they put in there is essentially a psychological profile. And I met with this psychologist, and his first words were actually, "I've been doing this for 20 some years, and this is the worst pastoral profile I've ever seen." I was like, "So what's the good news?"
Good. Good. So there's
and so I actually had to beg to take the test again, just to try and mitigate some of the extremes. Now, 5-10 years later, I would kind of disagree with him about his own vision of what a CEO is all about. But he had said, you look like somebody who could fire 50 people in a day and go home and enjoy your meal with your family. And pastors, you can't imagine firing anybody. And I think that's a poor stereotype on both ends. Like, I think that CEOs, the really great ones, care deeply about their people and about their organization, and those two things go hand in hand. And that would not make decisions like that callously, especially people they've invested in. And also pastors, there's this sense that pastors are real sweet, caring people that you want kind of by your bedside, but couldn't organize their way out of a box or have no kind of ambition or drive to make change or to move things forward, but rather people who offer kind of lofty ideas and read poems and sing songs and stuff like that. And so I actually think that some of the greatest pastors are like great CEOs, that they care so much about their mission and their vision and the people who are supporting them that they will make the hard decisions when they have to for the sake of the mission, to let folks go, to kill a program, to fire a volunteer. And so unfortunately not many churches operate that way, but I feel pretty committed to kind of creating that sort of environment because I do believe in what we're doing. So in a volunteer situation, I think there's benefits and drawbacks. Some people say you can't fire a volunteer, and I'm like, sure you can. Like, we do it all the time. But it is a different sort of relationship. But some of the benefits there too are that the people who are serving you, there isn't a paycheck tied to it, that they are there because they want to be there. And when they don't want to be there, they won't be anymore. There's some benefits in that. And also just having that many volunteers in our organization, as we grow as an organization, not only kind of the laity and the people who attend our services, but also with that, our staff. I've got this incredible pool of volunteers that basically, whether they know it or not, I'm always interviewing. The hundreds of folks in our church, I'm just constantly scanning the room for the next great talent that I think most companies probably don't have access to. That I just have, a few hundred people in front of me every Sunday that I'm watching do all sorts of things and trying to discern who's the next one that I'm gonna, scoop up to come join us on our staff to help move our mission forward. So there are benefits and drawbacks, I think, in that, but more similar than not. And that makes some people uncomfortable, but I'm pretty comfortable with it.
The one thing that hits me about a CEO and a business, and they answer to a board that makes decisions, and then they have to implement. I mean, do you have a similar structure? So it's like, hey, we got to get donations up, whatever the issues are or the challenges. Churches
are organized differently. Some have kind of one board of elders. I've got like 5. So I've got a whole army of people, of boards and committees that essentially hold me accountable and can fire me at any time, and that I'm responsible to. And that's also a big part of this kind of moment for me in my own leadership. Is it's one thing to lead staff. It's one thing to be successful, say, with your consumer. It's another thing to have a great relationship with your board and to figure out how to lead them and inspire them and to create change there. There's certain change that's easy to create with my staff and even with our consumer that's hard to create with our elders or our board. And then there's things that are really easy to convince our board of but hard to convince our staff of, And so I find myself between all these worlds all the time, trying to figure out how to bring us all along. It's a whole new dynamic that I'm trying to figure out.
When you talk about like influencing or leading your staff,
Yep.
right? Would you align that more with they're your direct reports or they're your peers? Like how do you approach that set of circumstances?
So they are, there's definitely, one of the things I think I learned earlier, and I don't know if this is true for everybody, it was helpful for me. This is how I've had to learn to operate, but in the beginning when I was leading, I think I tried to really minimize power differences. And we were all just buddies and we were all colleagues and we were all the exact same and we're all family and friends all the time. And then occasionally there would be moments where like someone had to be in charge and I would remind them that I was in charge, and it seemed to create a lot of chaos, and strife, and I thought we were friends, but now apparently, whatever. Or whenever there was any need for challenge or accountability, it was really difficult to do it because I had created a relationship that wasn't transparent or fair in the way that it needed to be. And so now I think on one hand, they know that we're all in this together, that we're all replaceable, that we're all only here for a time. There's some things that are similar across all of our positions, regardless of where you are in the organization, but also that I am charged with leading this organization and that they'll largely be held accountable to me. And so there are some processes and protocol in place there that just make that transparent. And I think that's made our relationship a lot more peaceful and appropriate in many ways. And so in managing evaluations and compensation things and making those hard decisions are a lot easier to have those conversations when those things are open and transparent. And strangely, I've found that it even incentivizes people. So my closest direct report, essentially our COO, we call her our Director of Operations, just a couple of weeks ago was saying to somebody in our community that kind of got back to me, but she had just said, I'm actually really motivated by the fact that I know that if I don't do my job, Justin would fire me. And it inspires me to show up and to be better every day. And so some of that stuff is like, I've learned to get leverage out of that rather than to create an environment that was just really cozy and comfortable for everybody and there was no real leader, but we're all just a team. But at the same time, I have to continue to create space to make sure that I'm hearing their voices and that they do have opportunities to challenge and to redirect our organization. One of the things that I'm pretty poor at and I need to get better at is, and I'm also learning in leadership. In the beginning, when it was all about vision and it wasn't about relationships, it was fine for me to be the one who was talking all the time. And now, as it's more about relationships, I find that I just have to listen more. And that's the challenge with our staff. I think that's how I create that sense of relationship or connection, is that I ask great questions, that I spend time giving them the floor and listening. I heard a leader recently say that if you as a leader stop listening, soon you'll be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. And I could see that coming, and so there's clearly like authoritative structures there, but also if I'm doing my job right, I'm listening more than I'm speaking. And so that, I think, is the kind of environment we're trying to create. Yeah.
It seems like you're mission driven.
Yeah.
And that's the source of accountability.
Yeah.
So it's not about personal preference. It's about like what we're trying to do, and more on that in a minute or two. But in the context of that, what are you looking for as you're identifying your high potentials? What are you looking for in leaders? Like when you're scanning people that come to your services that you have access to, like what sort of traits, characteristics, talents to you define leaders that can help you with your mission? I'm
looking for things that I think a lot of people are looking for, like influence, do they have a crowd? Do people follow them? When they speak, do folks listen? When they show up, do people show up around them, you know? I also think one of the things I'm looking for is passion. I've just realized they've got to have some energy, internal kind of engine that drives them. Are they passionate about what we're doing, about what they're doing? Curiosity is huge to me. When somebody gets curious about what we're doing, or even about their own life, or asks lots of questions, or is always reading, or engages on that level, I feel like we're probably on the trail of a leader there. And also, once again, one of the things, the kind of humble realizations of leadership too that I've come to is that leadership really starts by leading yourself. And so am I changing? How am I changing? How am I growing and evolving? And am I open to change? And so I think the leaders in our community that I'm looking for not only have influence and are curious and passionate, but they're also people that I see they're working on themselves. They're changing, they're evolving, they're growing. They're not the same people they were 2 years ago. They're teachable, humble, in those sorts of ways. And so when I start to see that kind of constellation, I know that we've got somebody that we want to pay attention to and create a pathway for if they're halfway interested in joining kind of what we're up to. So I think those are the things I'll look for. And then once we've identified those people, we kick the tires on it really through delegation. Like we'll give a task that is pretty menial and see what happens with it, and then something with a little larger responsibility and a little less direction, and then something with a lot of responsibility and almost no direction. And you kind of like earn your way into that. And that was something I learned too in the beginning. I think I used to delegate people who had high capacity. I would delegate tasks with all the details and just burn them out and lose them. And then other folks, I would just say, you know what, I'm bad at delegation, so I'm just gonna go do this, like the whole thing, and I'm sure you got it. And they didn't have it, and so that's been kind of this test of kind of just saying, let's just start here, and we'll give somebody something small, even if in my mind I know I got this huge project I want them to do before I jump there. Let's just see culturally, does this work? Are they a fit? Will they achieve? And can we give them some small things and see what they make of it, and then release the big project? So that's a big, like 30,000 foot view of the principle, I think, philosophy of how we develop leaders on our staff and even volunteers is that sort of process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One more potential organizational comparison.
Yeah.
You've got your mission, you identify and recruit and kind of develop people that can help you achieve that mission, build your team. Who are you in competition with? Organization like ours, I mean, we can readily identify, like we compete against these folks, we compete against these folks. In your, air quotes line of work, like who do you see as competition, or maybe under the same umbrella, sort of what are obstacles to achieving your mission no matter how strong your team is?
Yeah, I think defining who your competition is huge in determining even what your mission and your win is. So like, especially at the church, I think a lot of churches, they wouldn't want to own that their competition are other churches in town, but that's by default how they operate. And so, kind of in our industry or field or sector or whatever, a lot of churches spend a lot of time looking at other churches trying to kind of one up them. And we decided really early on that we wanted to move kind of the whole industry, the whole sphere forward. We wanted to be a part of creating change for the church, which would require us to have different competition. We weren't really interested in just trying to compete in the existing models of how church happens, but wanted to hopefully create a new model or innovate in some new ways. And so we turned our attention not on other churches, but we do our work in the middle of downtown Raleigh City here in North Carolina, and we realized that the people we wanted to compete for, we were competing with coffee shops and restaurants and brunch and CBS Sunday Morning and the New York Times and Sleeping Inn and the beach and the mountains and the rest. And so we wanted to figure out a way to connect with people who weren't connecting with any other faith community. And so we took all of our cues from hospitality in our facility, in our space, in our music, and even our approach, what we wear, how we communicate, is very much targeted at our competition being places that folks would opt out of church to participate in on a Sunday morning. And how do we create an environment that's as compelling, that provides as much peace or comfort or inspiration as any of those other spaces? And we became students of those organizations, And so we see ourselves more, it's funny, even when people walk by our space, lots of times they'll look through the windows when they don't know what it is. And yeah, I've heard a number of conversations where people go, I think this is a new bar in town, or I think this is the new restaurant, or I've heard this is a great art gallery, or, they're just searching, trying to figure out what is even going. And that's because those were the places we were paying attention to try and create an environment for those folks. So yeah, our competition right now isn't really other churches. It's we're trying to compete with those other entities. So.
Do you ever find yourself in a set of circumstances where you have to debate or defend your mission by comparison to other alternative missions?
Yeah.
So Christianity versus pick another religion, pick atheism.
Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself in sets of circumstances where you're defending that, positioning what you do versus what other people do? Does that occupy any percentage of your weekday time?
A little bit, but I think one of the things that we've tried to change the script on some in just our world is that the church for a long time has been known, and this isn't original to us or other people talking about this, thinking about this, leading in these ways, but for a long time I think the church has been known for what we're against, and we really want to be known for what we're for. So we spend a lot of time, even things that we would see as our competition, we think it's to our benefit to loop ourselves in with them, to befriend them. So we regularly celebrate and promote great restaurants in our town and amazing art exhibits and coffee shops, and figure out ways to kind of place ourselves in their sphere and to celebrate the good work that other people are doing, which honestly has given us more credibility and buy-in with our community. But we also want to be honest about, we are a church. We do have a kind of a perspective that we're offering to the world, but we try to bring it humbly. And so I don't see other religions as sort of competition to us, but just great conversation partners, and we try to position ourselves in that way. So just 2 weeks ago, we had a pretty influential guy in our community, in our city, who's a devout Buddhist, who came and worshiped with us for Sunday, and we spent a day or two after just unpacking what that experience was like for him. And I've kind of made an agreement with him. I'm like, all right, so I'm headed to temple with you now, and I think we want to be open and authentic enough to say, if you want to talk about, say, conversion or winning somebody, our approach is that we both have to show up to the table open to be won over, In that kind of exchange and relationship, we hopefully both walk away benefiting. And so when I sit down with someone like that, I'm as open and willing to be converted as I hope they are in our conversation, as we both seek the most beautiful and true way of being and living in this world. And so that's our deeper kind of mission, is I think we're all kind of seeking that kind of truth and beauty. And as long as we stay connected to that, I think we'll be faithful to our mission. So we try to avoid kind of the fights over this stuff, or putting turf in the ground, and we're looking to make more friends than enemies, I think, at this point. So yeah.
Good approach. Yeah. But I think most leaders periodically in quiet places question their own mission.
Yeah.
Are we really making a difference here? Is this is what we're doing?
Yeah.
Usually in the face of some sort of
sure.
feedback or tough time or whatever it happens to be. If you have those moments, how do you manage that skepticism or periodic doubt?
Yeah, absolutely. We do. I do. Our church's stated mission, it's actually kind of more of our vision. We just say that we all sort of imitate or follow somebody. You choose the clothes you wear, the car you drive, the town you live in. We all make those decisions based on somebody that we're trying to imitate. And so we just say that it's that everybody owes it to themselves to ask the question, who are you following, or who are you imitating, and are they worth it? Are they worth following? Are they worth imitating? And we believe that the person of Jesus, that he lived a remarkable life that's worthy of imitation. And so we're seeking to live lives that imitate him, that when others see us, they would see Jesus, right? And the kind of life that he lived. that was so compelling. And so there are plenty times where I will find myself in the weeds of what we're doing and all the meetings and all the budgets and the rest and go, is this helping anybody live more like Jesus, or are we just like filling the air with stuff? Are any of us actually like kinder, more forgiving, merciful, gracious? People are people in our city really seeing that the folks who gather in our building regularly are, the most loving folks in town, or the most peace-filled. And I think in those moments, I've got like two options. I can either kind of go to despair, like we've lost the plot, we're not fulfilling our mission, our vision, this is sort of a waste of time and I need to start selling insurance or whatever. But the other option, and this is where I think I've trained myself to go, is that's a really great question and it's worth entertaining because our mission, our vision matter enough. And so if what we're doing is not helping people live kind of remarkable lives or lives that are worth imitating, then let's change what we're doing, And so that's typically when I'll bring those kinds of, I'll probably let it sit for a day or two, but then I'll probably bring that to the team and go, guys, is this really working? Are we really making a difference? And if not, let's not go another day down this path and make the adjustments now and figure out and experiment and keep that entrepreneurial spirit alive. And not just sort of rest in that. So I have those moments all the time, but I often see them as a gift or kind of a whisper to say, yeah, you might be headed in the wrong direction, but it's still an opportunity right now to redirect, to change, to get back into the sweet spot of where we think change happens. So I think our mission right now to help people live lives worth imitating, there's not really a day where I doubt that. Like I can commit my life to that, I would love for people to look at my life and go, I don't know about all that stuff he believes, but I wish I knew more people like him. I wish my life looked more like his. I mean, to me, that's a pretty compelling idea that everybody wants in on. So how we get there, we probably gonna have to change all the time, but I feel pretty committed to that. Yeah.
What question
Yeah.
would you have asked you that I wasn't smart enough to identify? What did I miss here?
What do you want to be known for? Which I feel like is, such a heavy question that I am just now beginning to wrestle with. But I think professionally, the first thing is that, I want to say that I played a small part in moving the church forward, at least the model of the church, that the church will look different 20 years from now than it does today, and that we will have been a part of figuring that out. And the second thing that I've become increasingly passionate about is that when I was considering entering ministry, I had numerous people tell me this kind of like cliche kind of wisdom bit, and I think there is something true to it. But they would basically say, listen, if you can do anything else, do it. Like do not get into ministry or working for the church unless it's the only thing you can do. And I understand why they say that. It's hard work and it's just really unique, kind of strange stuff. And the church is not as holy and beautiful and all that as people sometimes. I mean, it operates like any organization or company. It can be rough. But a couple of months ago, I had the opportunity to hire someone from within our community who was on a very successful sort of business track. And I risked sitting down with them and saying, this is crazy. I mean, you would probably have to take a 50% pay cut and step out of this very successful career. But I think you're exactly the kind of person we would need to help us go from here. Would you ever even consider working at the church? And they shocked me and were like, I think I might. And because of that, they ended up coming on staff and have made such a difference in our organization. And what's really humbling is they'll say to me regularly, probably once a week, I can't tell you how grateful I am that I'm here and that I'm working here. I was fine doing what I was doing, but I've never felt more alive or more like I was in the sweet spot. And this is somebody who would have never taken a job at any other church or wasn't even thinking about it until we created that moment. And so I've never had really huge ambitions about growing a large church. But when I thought, man, if we could create that moment for more people to have meaningful work and to contribute to something that I think is really worthwhile, then I'm okay with us just exploding, because I want to create more and more and more of those environments. And so the second kind of thing I really hope to do, I think it's a big goal for my life when it comes professionally to the work of the church, is that I want us to become the kind of church where we say, unless you have to do something else, come join us. And to be the kind of organization that is just the most incredible environment to work for, where people feel really poured into and developed, that the sky's the limit, that their creative capacities are stretched. And so, I think there's this external thing, like with our consumers, the people who come, I want to be a part of creating the new model of whatever church is going to look like. But internally, I maybe even more passionately want to create the kind of environment where folks believe that the church is the greatest organization in the world to work for, and that we always have more people who want to work for us than we can afford to hire. So I think professionally that's it, and then personally, what do I want to be known for? I think it's just integrity. I want to be somebody who is what they say they are. Just transparency, authenticity there, that I wasn't trying to pull one over on anybody. I think especially in the world that I work, that there's so much suspicion and so many people have been hurt by pastors and priests and others who act one way in sort of in one space and completely different in another. And so trying to be really kind of an honest person with integrity. The only other leadership thing that sort of came to mind was I heard somebody recently say that some people are really good at one thing and other people are like pretty good at like 2 or 3 things. And then this gentleman said, and then there's the rest of us who aren't really that great at anything and we become leaders. And I remember thinking there's some truth to that, because there are great leaders out there who are really sharp at some stuff, but the innate leaders who are just so good at developing other people and leading people along and bringing consensus, I think part of their gift is that they aren't so great at any one thing that they get in their own way. They're always willing to hear other voices. They're always willing to collaborate and bring people together. They have a healthy ego that lets other people win in front and around them. And I think that's something that's been sticking with me, is this idea of like, there's lots of people who are better communicators than me or better leaders, can develop people better. But I also think that's part of what makes me a strong leader, is that I can recognize that and that my own gifts don't get in the way of helping bring other people into the fold. So that was kind of, in a strange way, good news to me. And I think for other people who are like, I don't know, I'm not really great at anything, to go, oh, that's awesome. You might be like an incredible leader, that just rang true. So I think that's everything I know.
As I think, we're going to do other interviews with other people in a variety of different walks of life that are in one way, shape, or form leaders. We will not do a better interview than this one.
Come on, no.
So on behalf of everybody at the Center for Leadership Studies, Justin, sincere thanks.
Thank you, Sam.
Really appreciate it.
Man. Absolutely.
Take care,
It's
go
been
lead.
a pleasure. Thank you.